At 28, my billionaire dad grounded me. He cut my accounts and trapped me upstairs because I refused to sign one page that chained our fortune to his ego. I did not scream. I opened a trust document my grandfather wrote and triggered a clause Dad forgot existed. By the time he realized it, his cards were declining and his spending was frozen. Rich families do not fight with yelling. We fight with paperwork, and I had the sharpest claws in the room. My name is Josephine Gray, and at 28 years old, standing in the climate-controlled silence of the executive suite on the 42nd floor, I was being grounded. It was not the sort of grounding you give a teenager who sneaks out past curfew. There were no shouts about car keys or television privileges. In the stratospheric tax bracket of the Callahan family, punishment does not look like anger. It looks like administration. It looks like a calendar wipe. It looks like a security protocol update. My father, Everett Callahan, sat behind his desk. The desk was a slab of imported black marble that seemed to absorb the light in the room. He did not look like a tyrant. He looked like what he was on the cover of Forbes last month, a visionary, a titan of industry, the CEO of Callahan Meridian Group. He was calmly signing a stack of letters with a fountain pen, refusing to make eye contact with me. "Badge," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. I unclipped my corporate ID from my blazer. It was the only thing that proved I was the director of risk strategy, and not just the daughter of the owner. I placed it on the marble. It made a hollow. Plastic click. "Phone," he said. "This is my personal property." "Dad," I said. My voice was steady, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "The bill is paid by the family office," he replied, finally looking up. His eyes were the same shade of steel gray as mine, but hard, like concrete that had set 40 years ago. "The data plan is corporate. The device is a security risk if you are no longer an active employee. Phone, now." I placed the phone next to the badge. "You are suspended from your duties at Callahan Meridian Group effectively immediately," Everett said, returning his attention to his paperwork. "I have instructed it to revoke your login credentials. Your calendar has been cleared. The company car is waiting downstairs to take you to the penthouse. You are not to leave the residence until you understand the weight of the mistake you made this morning." The mistake. He called it a mistake. I called it doing the job he allegedly hired me to do. 2 hours ago, in a boardroom filled with bankers and lawyers who billed $600 an hour, I had flagged a discrepancy in the Stonegate acquisition. I had pointed out that the revenue projections were inflated by nearly 15% and that the debt structure relied on interest rates remaining historically low, a gamble that no sane risk officer would approve. I had spoken clearly, professionally, and without emotion, but I had done it in front of an audience. "You embarrassed me," Everett said, his voice dropping an octave. "You embarrassed this family. We present a united front. Josephine, always." "I presented a risk assessment," I corrected him. "That is my title." "Your title is whatever I say it is," he snapped. "And right now, your title is daughter, and you are failing at it." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the black marble. It came to rest perfectly parallel to the edge of the desk. I did not need to pick it up to know what it was. It was a family consensus waiver. This was the real reason I was standing here. The acquisition deal required a massive amount of collateral. Everett wanted to pledge assets that were technically held in the family trust assets that legally belonged to the beneficiaries, not just to him. To do that without triggering a messy audit, he needed the beneficiaries to sign off. He needed me to agree that this massive debt-heavy deal was in our best interest. He did not ground me because I spoke up. He grounded me because he needed leverage. I looked at the paper, then back at him. "You are leveraging the legacy trust," I said. "You are exposing the entire family fortune to a market that is already volatile. If I sign this, and the Stonegate deal goes south, we do not just lose the company, we lose everything: the properties, the portfolio, the liquidity." "I am the CEO," Everett said, his jaw tightening. "I know what is best for the capital." Then why do you need my signature so badly that you are taking my phone? The silence that stretched between us was thick enough to choke on. He hated this. He hated that I was not Bryce, my brother, who would have signed the document without reading it just to get a pat on the head and a new sports car. He hated that I read the fine print. He hated that I had spent 4 years working at a financial oversight agency before he guilted me into coming back to the family business. He stood up. He was a tall man, imposing, tailored to perfection. He walked around the desk and stood in front of me. He expected me to shrink. Most people did. "You will go to the penthouse," he said. "You will stay there. No drivers, no guests, no shopping accounts. I have frozen your personal cards. You want to act like a stranger to this family's interests? Fine. You can see what life looks like without this family's money backing you up." It was a siege. He was cutting off my supply lines. He thought I was a soft, spoiled heiress who would panic the moment her credit card was declined at a coffee shop. He thought that 24 hours without my social calendar and my driver would break me. I looked him in the eye. I felt a strange, cold calm wash over me. It was the same sensation I used to get when I stood on the edge of a diving board, knowing the water was freezing, knowing I had to jump anyway. "Dad," I said softly, "what? Do you want me to be silent, or do you want me to sign?" His face flushed a deep, angry red. It was the reaction of a man who was used to buying obedience and was frustrated that the price had suddenly gone up. He realized in that second that I understood the transaction. This wasn't discipline, it was extortion. "Get out," he hissed. He pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Security, escort Ms. Gray to the lobby. Inform the driver she is going straight home." He turned his back on me. "Do not come back down until that paper has your signature on it." I walked out. The walk from the CEO's office to the elevator bank is usually a power walk. Today, it was a gauntlet. The executive assistants, women I had worked with for 2 years, kept their eyes glued to their screens. They knew. In a company like CMG, information travels faster than light. The king had exiled the princess. No one wanted to be caught looking at the corpse. 2 security guards were waiting by the elevators. I knew them, Mike and David. Mike had taught me how to throw a proper punch in the company gym when I was 22. Now, he looked at his boots. "Sorry, Ms. Gray," Mike mumbled. "Orders from the top." "It is okay. Mike," I said, "you are doing your job." They escorted me down. They walked me through the lobby, past the towering glass sculpture that cost $2 million, past the reception desk where I usually greeted the staff by name. The humiliation was calculated. Everett wanted me to feel small. He wanted me to feel like a child being sent to the naughty corner, stripped of autonomy. The black sedan was waiting. The driver wasn't my usual guy. It was someone from the heavy security rotation. The partition was already up. I got in. The door locked with a heavy, final thud. The drive to the Harbor Point residential district took 20 minutes. I watched the city scroll by. Harbor Point was a city of steel and ambition, built on shipping and old money. My family owned a significant chunk of the skyline. We were American royalty in this zip code, and I was the prisoner in the tower. The car pulled into the underground garage of the Meridian Spire, the residential skyscraper my father built 10 years ago. I had the penthouse. It sounds glamorous, and it is. It is 6,000 square feet of Italian marble, floor-to-ceiling glass, and views that stretch all the way to the Atlantic. But as I stepped out of the elevator directly into my foyer, the silence hit me. I walked to the window. Below me, the city was moving. People were rushing to meetings, buying sandwiches, arguing on phones, living their messy, chaotic, free lives. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. I was 28 years old. I had a master's degree in finance. I had experience. I had intuition. But to my father, I was just an asset class. I was something to be managed, optimized, and occasionally liquidated for parts if the deal required it. He thought he had grounded me. He thought he had trapped me in a golden cage where the only key was my submission. I walked to the kitchen. The fridge was stocked. The wine cooler was full. I could survive up here for months. That was the point. I was comfortable, but I was powerless. Or so he thought. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand trembling slightly, not from fear, from adrenaline. Everett Callahan had made a critical tactical error. He assumed that because I was his daughter, I played by his rules. He assumed that because I had lived in his house, driven his cars, and worked in his building, I was dependent on his goodwill. He forgot that I was a risk officer. My entire job was to prepare for the worst-case scenario. I walked into my bedroom, past the designer clothes I rarely wore and the vanity table covered in expensive creams I didn't need. I went to the walk-in closet. Behind a row of winter coats, bolted into the structural concrete of the building, was a small safe. It was my personal safe, not the one the house staff knew about. I spun the dial. Left to 32, right to 14, left to 88. The heavy steel door swung open. Inside, there was no jewelry. There was no cash. There was just a thick, leather-bound folder. I pulled it out and sat on the floor of the closet. The leather was cool against my skin. It smelled of old paper and archival ink. This was the Callahan Legacy Trust. The original document, not the amended version my father kept in his office safe, not the summarized version the family lawyers handed out at Thanksgiving. This was a certified copy of the original deed of trust my grandfather, Silas Callahan, had drafted 40 years ago. Grandfather Silas had been a hard man, but he was not a blind one. He had built the empire from a single trucking route, and he knew exactly what kind of man his son Everett was. He knew Everett loved the applause more than the work. He knew Everett had an ego that could swallow a balance sheet whole. I had memorized this document. I studied it the way a priest studies scripture. I studied it the way a general studies a map of the terrain. I flipped past the preamble. I flipped past the distribution schedules. I flipped past the standard legalese that made up 90% of the text. I stopped at Article 9, Section 4. My finger traced the line. Special oversight activation at beneficiary age 28. My father thought today was just a Tuesday. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about hierarchy. He thought that by cutting my credit cards and locking me in the penthouse, he was squeezing me until I signed his waiver. He did not realize that by grounding me, he had given me exactly what I needed: time to focus, time to execute. I looked down at the date on my watch. I had turned 28 3 weeks ago. The window was open. The clause was active. My father wanted a war of attrition. He wanted to starve me out. He thought rich families fought with yelling, with throwing vases, with dramatic exits. But he was wrong. We fight with paperwork. We fight with clauses. We fight with the fine print that nobody else bothers to read. I closed the folder and rested my hand on the cover. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who has just realized the opponent has left his king exposed. He thinks he locked the doors, but he did not lock the clauses. To understand why a single signature on a single page matters enough to imprison a 28-year-old woman in a penthouse, you have to understand the machinery of the Callahan family. You have to understand that we are not a family in the traditional sense. We are a corporation with a shared last name. Outsiders look at the Callahan Meridian Group and they see trucks. They see the blue and silver shipping containers stacked high in the ports of Oakland and Newark. They see the cargo planes idling on tarmac strips in Luxembourg. They see the infrastructure of modern commerce. We move things. We are the blood vessels of the economy. If you bought a coffee maker today, or a steel beam, or a microchip, there is a statistical probability of 80% that CMG handled it at some point in the chain. My father, Everett Callahan, likes to tell magazines that he built this. He is the self-made legend. He is the man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps. Except those bootstraps were made of old money and inherited land. The press eats it up. They love the narrative of the rugged American capitalist. They put him on covers with his jaw set and his eyes looking toward the horizon. They call him a titan. But inside the house, inside the glass walls of our estate in Harbor Point, the reality is colder. I was never the favorite. That title belongs to my brother, Bryce. Bryce is 2 years older than me. He has my father's chin and my mother's ability to lie without blinking. Bryce is the executive vice president of global relations. It is a made-up job for a made-up prince. His actual role is to wear Italian suits, shake hands with politicians, and stand next to Dad whenever a camera shutter clicks. Bryce loves the light. He feeds on it. He believes the press releases. He actually thinks he is a genius because people on the payroll tell him he is. Then there is my mother, Lillian. If Bryce is the face, Mom is the varnish. She is the perfect executive wife. She runs the Callahan Foundation. She organizes the charity galas where plates cost $5,000 and the wine costs more. She smiles on cue. She asks about your children. She sends thank you notes within 24 hours. But if you look closely at Lillian Callahan, really look at her when the guests have gone and the catering staff is clearing the tables, you see a woman who has been slowly erased. She has no opinions. She has no bank account that Dad does not monitor. She bartered her voice for a seat at the table 30 years ago, and she has been paying the interest on that debt ever since. And then there is me, Josephine. I was the anomaly. I did not study public relations. I did not study art history. I went to business school, and then I did the one thing that made my father look at me with genuine confusion. I went to work for the government. I spent 4 years at a financial oversight agency in Washington. I spent my days hunting people like my father. I learned how to read ledgers until my eyes burned. I learned how to spot the shell companies, the offshore leaks, the inflated valuations. I learned that the devil is never in the big numbers. The devil is in the footnotes. Dad hated it. He called it a betrayal. He nagged and bribed and guilted me until I agreed to come home. He offered me the position of Director of Risk Strategy at CMG. It sounded important. It was meant to be a trophy job. He wanted me to sit in a nice office, approve the insurance policies, and look diverse for the annual report. He wanted a rubber stamp. He did not expect me to actually do the job. He did not expect me to treat CMG like a hostile entity I was auditing. But my diligence was not just about professional pride. It was about survival. Because I knew something Bryce and Mom ignored. I knew where the money really lived. People think Everett Callahan is a billionaire. In terms of lifestyle, he is. In terms of legal reality, he is an employee. The true owner of the Callahan Meridian Group is not a person. It is the Callahan Legacy Trust. My grandfather, Silas Callahan, died before I was born, but his ghost dictates everything we do. Silas was a mean, paranoid, brilliant bastard who started with one truck and ended with an empire. He did not trust his son. He knew Everett had a hole in his soul that only applause could fill. So Silas created the trust. The trust holds the voting shares. The trust holds the real estate deeds. The trust holds the liquidity. Everett is the primary trustee, which gives him control, but he is not the beneficiary. The beneficiaries are the bloodline, me, Bryce, and future generations. This structure is designed to protect the money from the family. It is designed to stop a reckless heir from selling the company to buy an island. Or, in my father's case, to stop an ego-driven CEO from leveraging the family legacy to build monuments to himself. Most people in my family treat the trust like magic. They swipe the card, and the jet has fuel. They sign the bill, and the house gets renovated. They do not ask how the plumbing works. I did. I remember the day I found the copy of the trust document. I was 22, fresh out of college, home for a weekend. I was looking for my birth certificate in the library safe, and I found the thick, leather-bound volume instead. I sat on the floor and read it for 6 hours. It was dense. It was boring. It was beautiful. It was a cage for my father. Grandfather Silas had written in safeguards. He had written in clauses that acted like tripwires. One line stuck with me. A piece of advice Silas had supposedly given his lawyer while drafting the deed. Do not trust anyone who is too fond of the sound of their own name. I memorized the document because I had a feeling in my gut, even back then, that one day I would need a shield. My father was getting bolder. His deals were getting bigger, louder, riskier. He was no longer satisfied with steady growth. He wanted to be a historic figure, and men who want to make history usually end up making disasters. That brings us to the clause that was currently burning a hole in my mind as I stood in my penthouse prison. The trust was not a static object. It evolved based on the age of the beneficiaries. Grandfather Silas believed that wisdom came with time, or at least that the impulsiveness of youth faded. Article 9, the Special Oversight Activation, the language was precise. It stated that upon a beneficiary reaching the age of 28, if the primary trustee attempted to encumber more than 40% of the trust assets into a single speculative venture without unanimous consent, the beneficiary had the right to trigger a review. More importantly, it gave the beneficiary the right to become a temporary co-trustee. I turned 28 last month. My father knew this. He might not have remembered the specific clause number, but he knew the window was opening. He knew his unchecked reign was coming to an expiration date. That was why he was so desperate for the Stonegate deal. He wanted to lock the assets into a structure that he controlled before I had the legal standing to question him. He was trying to outrun the calendar, the grounding, the removal of my phone, the humiliation. It was all fear. He was not punishing a child. He was trying to suppress a rival. He needed me to sign that waiver because the waiver would nullify the oversight clause. If I signed, I was legally stating that I agreed with the risk, and I waived my right to intervene. He needed that signature to keep his crown. I walked over to the window of the penthouse and looked down at the city. The sun was setting, turning the glass canyons of Harbor Point into golden fire. Somewhere down there, in the CMG Tower, my father was probably having a scotch, telling Bryce that I would break in a day or two. He was telling himself that he was the patriarch, the alpha, the provider. He forgot that he was just a steward. He forgot that Grandfather Silas had anticipated a man exactly like him. I went back to the closet and looked at the safe where the document lay. I did not need to read it again. I knew the procedure. The trust had a break glass in case of emergency mechanism. It wasn't just about reviewing deals. It was about stopping the bleeding. If the beneficiary could demonstrate that the trustee was acting in self-interest, rather than in the interest of the trust, the beneficiary could freeze the discretionary spending of the trustee, not the company payroll, not the essential operations, just the trustee's access to the honeypot. My father lived his life through the trust, his suits, his cars, his dinners, his travel, his business development expenses. It all flowed through that main vein. He had structured his entire existence around the idea that the money was his to command. I was about to turn off the tap. It was not about the money, it was about the structure. My father thought he could use the structure to crush me. He thought the weight of the institution would force me to my knees. But he had forgotten the first rule of structural engineering. The person who knows where the load-bearing walls are is the person who controls whether the building stands or falls. I was not just a grounded daughter. I was the compliance officer, and for the first time in his life, Everett Callahan was about to fail an audit. I took a deep breath. The air in the penthouse was recycled and cool. I sat down at the desk in the corner. I did not have my corporate computer. I did not have my phone, but I had a landline, a dusty, forgotten landline that connected to the building's internal network, and from there, to the outside world. I picked up the receiver. The dial tone hummed. It was the sound of opportunity. I wasn't calling my father. I wasn't calling my mother. I was going to make a call to the one person my father feared more than a margin call. I was going to call the independent fiduciary bank that managed the trust's actual accounts. My father had grounded me to keep me quiet. He was about to learn that silence is the loudest sound in the world when it is accompanied by a frozen asset notification. He wanted to play games with Access Fine. We would play. But we would play by the rules my grandfather wrote, not the ones my father made up as he went along. I dialed the number. 7 digits. I waited. Harbor Point Fiduciary Services, a voice answered. Direct line. This is Josephine Gray, I said. Beneficiary ID number 49 Alpha. I am invoking Article 9. I need to speak to the Oversight Committee. The war had begun, and I had the biggest gun in the library. To understand the gravity of the silence in my penthouse, you have to witness the noise that preceded it. You have to understand what happened inside Boardroom A of the Callahan Meridian Group headquarters exactly 3 hours before my father confiscated my badge. The room smelled of stale coffee and expensive cologne. It was the smell of a deal that had been cooking for too long. We were gathered to finalize the acquisition of Stonegate Infrastructure. This was not just a merger, it was my father's bid for immortality. Stonegate controlled a network of deep-water ports and rail terminals in the Pacific Northwest. If CMG acquired them, we would dominate the Western supply chain for the next 50 years. It was the kind of monopoly players dream about, but the price tag was $4.2 billion. The table was crowded. My father, Everett, sat at the head. Bryce sat to his right, looking like he had already spent the bonus check. The CFO, Marcus Thorne, was there, sweating through his shirt. And then there were the bankers from the investment firms, the sharks who smelled blood in the water, and me. I sat at the far end, the designated buzzkill. Bryce was in the middle of his presentation. He had a laser pointer and a slide deck full of words like synergy and legacy and unprecedented growth. The market is begging for this consolidation, Bryce said, his voice smooth. Stonegate is the missing piece of the puzzle. Once we integrate their logistics with our fleet, we are looking at a 30% increase in operational efficiency within 18 months. This is a slam dunk. Everett nodded, his eyes gleaming. He was not looking at the numbers. He was looking at the map on the screen, seeing his name stretched across the coastline. Excellent work, Bryce, Everett said. This is bold. This is what the Callahan name stands for. He looked around the table. Does anyone have any reason why we should not proceed to the signing phase? The bankers shook their heads. Of course they did not. They stood to make $50 million in transaction fees the moment the ink was dry. I cleared my throat. The sound was small, but in that room, it was like a gunshot. I have a question, I said. Bryce sighed, a theatrical exhale that was meant to signal to everyone that his annoying little sister was speaking. Joe, we have been over the risk assessment. It is a standard leveraged buyout. It is not standard, I said, keeping my voice flat. I opened the binder in front of me. It was 400 pages thick. I was the only person at the table who had actually tabbed the pages. I am looking at the revenue projections for Stonegate's northern terminals. They are assuming a 20% growth in cargo volume based on trade agreements that have not been signed yet. If those agreements stall, their revenue drops by 15%. That is a conservative estimate. Marcus, the CFO, chimed in quickly. He glanced at my father nervously. We are confident in the trade winds. You are betting $4 billion on the wind, I said. But that is not the kill switch. The kill switch is the debt structure. I turned the binder around and slid it toward the center of the table. To finance this, we are taking on $3 billion in senior secured notes, I continued. The interest rate is floating. It is tied to the prime rate plus 2%. I ran the stress test this morning. If the Federal Reserve hikes rates by just 1/4 point next quarter, our debt service payments go up by $12 million a month. That wipes out our liquidity. We would be insolvent within a year. The room went dead silent. The bankers shifted in their chairs. They knew I was right. They just hoped nobody would say it out loud until after they cashed their checks. Bryce laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. Here we go. The director of risk strategy is afraid of a little risk. This is business. Josephine, you have to spend money to make money. You cannot run a conglomerate like a savings account. I am not talking about saving pennies. Bryce, I said, I am talking about a covenant breach. Look at page 312. There is a penalty clause. If our debt-to-earnings ratio exceeds a certain limit, the lenders can call in the entire loan immediately. If rates go up, we hit that limit in 6 months. They will take the company, they will take the ships, they will take the building we are sitting in. I looked directly at my father. Dad, this deal is too heavy. It is structured to fail if the weather changes even a little bit. We are putting the entire CMG legacy on a roulette wheel. Everett did not look at the binder. He did not look at the bankers. He looked at me with a mixture of disappointment and irritation. "Marcus," Everett said, not breaking eye contact with me. "Is what she says true?" Marcus swallowed hard. "It is a worst-case scenario, sir, a theoretical possibility, but the rewards—" "I do not pay you for theoretical fear," Everett snapped. He turned back to me. "Josephine, you are missing the forest for the trees. You are looking at spreadsheets. I am looking at the future. I founded this company on risks you would not have the stomach for." "You founded this company when you had nothing to lose," I countered. "Now you have everything to lose. And it is not just your money, it is the family's money." That was the line. I saw his eyes narrow. He reached into his leather portfolio and pulled out a single document. It was the same document he would later present to me in his office, the one that led to my exile. "Since you brought up the family," Everett said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "we need to formalize the collateral. The banks require a guarantee from the Callahan Legacy Trust to secure the final tranche of the loan. Since the assets are held jointly, I need a consensus signature from the beneficiaries." He slid the paper down the long mahogany table. It stopped in front of me. "Sign it," he said. "Show me you are part of this team." I looked at the document. It was a waiver. It was a full release of liability. It authorized the use of the trust's core assets, the voting shares of CMG, as collateral for the Stonegate debt. If I signed this, and the deal failed, the banks wouldn't just take the new ports. They would take control of CMG itself. The trust would be wiped out. My grandfather's legacy would be auctioned off to the highest bidder. "I cannot sign this," I said. "Excuse me," Everett asked. "I cannot sign this," I repeated, louder this time. "It is a violation of fiduciary duty. You are asking the trust to take on 100% of the risk for a deal that benefits your ego. As a beneficiary, and as an officer of this company, I am telling you this is reckless." Bryce slammed his hand on the table. "Oh, come on. Joe, stop playing the martyr. You just hate that Dad came up with this and not you." "I hate that you are walking us off a cliff," I shot back. "Dad, look at the numbers. Please, just read the page I marked." Everett stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I am the CEO of this company," he roared. "I built this table. I built this room. And I do not need permission from my daughter to run my business." He wasn't speaking to me as a father anymore. He was speaking as a tyrant who had been challenged in front of his court. "You are weak, Josephine," he said, pointing a finger at me. "You have always been weak. You hide behind rules and regulations because you do not have the vision to lead. You are not a strategist. You are a paper pusher." He looked at the bankers. "Give us a moment. Everyone out except the family." The room cleared in 10 seconds. The bankers and executives fled like rats sensing a fire. When the door clicked shut, the silence was suffocating. "You embarrassed me," Everett hissed. "You undermined me in front of Wall Street." "I saved you from a lawsuit," I said, standing my ground. "If the shareholders found out you ignored a risk assessment like that, they would sue you for negligence." "I am the majority shareholder," Everett shouted. "I am the law in this building." "Not if you use the trust," I said. "The trust has rules. Dad, you are the trustee, not the owner. You have a fiduciary duty to protect the assets, not gamble them." He looked at me as if I had slapped him. Then, a cold mask settled over his face. "You are done," he said. "What?" "You are done. I am removing you from the Stonegate project. In fact, I am removing you from the building. If you cannot support the vision of this company, you have no place in its leadership." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "I am sending a memo to IT right now," he said. "Your access is revoked. Your calendar is wiped. You are going to go home. You are going to sit in your room, and you are going to think about loyalty. And you are not coming back until you are ready to sign that paper." "You are grounding me?" I asked, incredulous. "I am 28 years old." "I am grounding you because you are acting like a child who does not understand how the real world works," he said. "You think you can lecture me on finance? Let us see how you handle finance when your accounts are frozen. Let us see how confident you are when you do not have the Callahan name opening doors for you." He looked at Bryce. "Escort her to my office. I will deal with her credentials there." Bryce stood up, a smirk playing on his lips. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed seeing the smart sister get crushed. "Come on, Joe," Bryce said. "Walk of shame." I gathered my binder. I did not look at Bryce. I looked at my father. "You are making a mistake," I said. "Not about me, about the deal. The interest rates will kill you." "Get out," Everett said. I walked out of the boardroom. My legs felt heavy, but I kept my head high. As I walked down the hallway, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the last message I would receive before Everett confiscated the device. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a notification from the encrypted messaging app I used for sensitive communications. It was from Naomi Klein. Naomi was the independent co-trustee of the Callahan Legacy Trust. She was a woman of absolute integrity, appointed by my grandfather specifically to keep an eye on people like my father. She was usually silent, a dormant observer, but she was awake now. The message was short. "I saw the board minutes draft. I saw the waiver he is trying to push through. If he is forcing signatures, you need to act tonight. The bank is already preparing the wire transfer for the morning." I stared at the screen. My father wasn't just bullying me, he was accelerating. He was going to bypass the safeguards and force the deal through tomorrow morning, with or without my formal consent, gambling that I wouldn't sue my own family to stop him. He was wrong. I slipped the phone back into my pocket just as Bryce grabbed my elbow to steer me toward the executive elevators. "Don't touch me," I said, pulling my arm away. "Don't cry," Bryce mocked. "I am not crying," I said. And I wasn't. The sadness had evaporated in the boardroom. What was left was cold. Hard clarity. My father thought he was grounding a rebellious daughter. He thought he was taking away my toys. But as I walked toward his office to hand over my badge, I realized he had just given me the only weapon I needed. He had given me proof. He had proven that he was acting recklessly. He had proven he was ignoring fiduciary warnings. He had proven he was coercing a beneficiary. Naomi Klein was ready. I was ready. The boardroom had been his theater, but the trust document in my safe. That was my courtroom, and court was about to be in session. The document on the floor of my closet was not just paper, it was a topographical map of a minefield my grandfather had laid 40 years ago, anticipating exactly this moment. I sat cross-legged on the carpet, the heavy leather-bound volume open to Article 9. The air in the penthouse was still, recycled and cool, a sharp contrast to the fire spreading through my nervous system. I had read this trust a dozen times before, but I had always read it as a hypothetical exercise. I had read it like a history student reads a treaty. Now, I was reading it like a soldier checking her ammunition. The heading was printed in bold: Archaic Typeface Special Oversight Activation and Beneficiary Rights. I ran my finger under the text. The words were precise. They were cold. They were beautiful. Upon the youngest beneficiary attaining the age of 28, should the primary trustee engage in transactions that encumber the trust corpus beyond 40% of its liquid value, said beneficiary shall be granted immediate status as temporary co-trustee for the purpose of fiduciary review. I was 28. The Stonegate deal encumbered nearly 60% of our liquid value. The lock was open. But it was the next paragraph that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a subsection I had skimmed over in the past, titled The Freeze Provision. In the event of a dispute regarding the safety of the assets, the co-trustee shall have the unilateral authority to suspend all non-essential discretionary disbursements until a third-party audit is concluded. This includes, but is not limited to, travel, personal stipends, acquisition retainers, and any capital expenditure not required for the immediate physical maintenance of existing operations. I sat back, the weight of the words settling on me. Non-essential discretionary disbursements. My father, Everett Callahan, did not live on a salary. He lived on disbursements. The private jet fueling at the airport, a disbursement. the 5-star hotel suite he booked for his mistress in Zurich. A disbursement, the consulting fees he paid to Bryce's friends to pretend they were working disbursements. And most importantly, the massive deposit required to lock in the Stonegate acquisition by tomorrow morning, a disbursement. It all clicked into place. The grounding, the confiscation of my phone, the frantic demand for my signature on the waiver. Everett hadn't grounded me because I was bad. He hadn't grounded me because I embarrassed him. He had grounded me because he knew I had just turned 28. He knew the special oversight clause was live. He needed that waiver signed because the waiver contained a tiny sentence buried in the middle that explicitly surrendered my rights under Article 9. If I signed that paper, I would have legally neutered myself. I would have handed him the keys to the vault and agreed to let him drive us off a cliff. He was terrified. The king wasn't punishing the princess. The king was trying to assassinate a rival claimant to the throne. I stood up, my knees cracking slightly. I needed to move. I needed to execute this with surgical precision. If I made one mistake, one procedural error, my father's army of lawyers would tear the freeze order apart in 5 minutes. I went to the desk where the landline sat. It was an old-fashioned beige unit, heavy and solid. I picked up the receiver and dialed the number for Naomi Klein again. Naomi picked up on the first ring. Josephine. Her voice was tight. She was the independent trustee, a role that usually meant signing tax forms once a year. Now, she was in the line of fire. I have the document. Naomi, I said. I am looking at the freeze provision. Subsection C. He is moving fast. Joe, Naomi whispered. I just got an email from the CFO. They are initiating the wire transfer for the Stonegate deposit at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. $150 million, non-refundable. He cannot send it if the account is frozen, I said. He is the primary trustee, Naomi argued. The bank listens to him. They have listened to him for 30 years. If you try to block this, he will scream that you are interfering with business operations. He will say you are mentally unstable. He will say you are acting out of spite. Let him scream, I said. I am not acting out of spite. I am acting out of fiduciary duty. Naomi, I need you to confirm something for me. Has he formally presented the risk assessment to you? No. Has he disclosed the conflict of interest regarding Bryce's involvement in the deal structure? No. Then he is in breach, I said. And we are not just going to freeze the deal, we are going to freeze him. I took a deep breath. There is another name in the trust. I need you to find the contact information for Malcolm Red. There was a silence on the line, a long, heavy silence. Judge Red, Naomi asked. Josephine, he has not been involved in the trust since your grandfather died. He is retired. He lives in a cabin in Montana. He is the nuclear option. We are past the point of diplomacy, I said. Article 12. The Trust Protector. Grandfather appointed Malcolm Red as the final arbiter. He has the power to suspend a trustee who is acting in bad faith. I need to copy him on the notice. If you bring Malcolm Red into this, Naomi warned, there is no going back. This becomes a war. We are already at war, Naomi, I said, looking at the locked door of my penthouse. I am a prisoner in my own home. I am fighting back with the only weapon I have left. Naomi exhaled. Okay, I will get you his secure fax number. Do it. Josephine, draft the notice. But be careful. If you miss a comma, Everett will destroy you. I hung up. I did not have my laptop. I did not have my company email, but the penthouse had a small business center in the library, a dusty desktop computer and a multifunction printer that hadn't been used in years. I booted it up. It groaned, the fans spinning loudly. It wasn't connected to the CMG server. It was on the open internet. Perfect. I began to type. This was not a creative writing exercise. This was a legal demolition. I had to channel every ounce of my experience as a compliance officer. I had to be cold, objective, and irrefutable to the Board of Governors, Harbor Point Fiduciary Bank, Atienne Compliance Department, from Josephine Silas Gray, beneficiary and co-trustee pursuant to Article 9, Subject immediate freeze order. Callahan legacy. Trust. I typed steadily. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I cited the clauses. I cited the dates. I laid out the evidence. Exhibit A, the coerced signature. I detailed the meeting in the boardroom, the threat of termination, the grounding used as leverage to force a waiver of rights. Exhibit B, the reckless endangerment of assets. I summarized the Stonegate debt structure, the floating interest rates, the immediate threat to the trust's solvency. Exhibit C, the lifestyle bleed. This was the dagger. I recalled the financial statements I had memorized. The trust was paying for things that had nothing to do with the business. The newly renovated wing of the Hamptons house, the phantom security consulting firm that Bryce ran. These weren't business expenses. They were theft disguised as overhead. I wrote with the clarity of someone who knew the truth was on their side. I did not use emotional language. I did not say I was angry. I used words like unauthorized, malfeasance, fiduciary breach, and immediate suspension. I stated clearly, as invoking co-trustee, I hereby deny authorization for any transaction exceeding $10,000 without my counter-signature. Specifically, I withhold consent for the Stonegate acquisition deposit scheduled for tomorrow. I paused. I needed to protect the innocent. This freeze applies strictly to discretionary capital and trustee accounts. Payroll, insurance, and standard operational maintenance are to remain active. I didn't want the truck drivers to lose their paychecks because my father was an egomaniac. I wanted the drivers to get paid. I wanted the ships to sail. I just didn't want my father to buy a new shipping line with money we didn't have. I printed the document. I signed it. My hand was steady. The ink looked black and final on the page. Then I scanned it back in. I found the contact list for the bank's legal team. I added Naomi Klein, and then, typing the numbers carefully from the information Naomi had given me, I added the fax destination for Malcolm Red. I sat there for a moment, the mouse cursor hovering over the send button. I thought about my mother. Lillian was probably downstairs right now, sitting in the drawing room, drinking her evening tea, pretending everything was fine. She would be horrified by this. She would see it as a betrayal. She had spent her life smoothing over Everett's rough edges, keeping the peace. I was about to shatter the peace. I thought about Bryce. He was probably at a club right now, putting bottles of champagne on the company card, bragging to his friends about the big deal he was closing tomorrow. He had no idea that the credit limit on his life was about to hit 0. They would hate me. They would call me a traitor. They would say I was ungrateful. But they were the ones who were wrong. They were the ones eating the seed corn. They were the ones burning the furniture to keep the house warm. I wasn't doing this to hurt them. I was doing this to save them from themselves. I pressed send. The progress bar on the screen moved slowly. 20%, 50%, 80%, sent. The message was out. It was traveling through the fiber optic cables beneath the city. It was landing in the inbox of the general counsel at Harbor Point Fiduciary Bank. It was printing out on a fax machine in a cabin in Montana. It was done. I sat back in the chair and closed my eyes. The adrenaline was starting to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But under the exhaustion, there was something else. Power. Real power. Not the fake power of a job title my father gave me. The power of the law. The power of ownership. I walked back to the window. The city lights were twinkling below. Somewhere in that grid of light, my father was sleeping, or perhaps still working, confident that he had won. He thought he had silenced me. He thought the grounding was the end of the story. He didn't realize that by locking me in, he had locked himself out. I whispered to the reflection in the glass, I am not breaking the family. I am just turning off the credit card for the ego. The phone rang. I stared at it. It wasn't the internal line. It was the outside line. I picked it up. Ms. Gray, a voice said. It was deep, crisp, professional. This is Arthur Vance, General Counsel for Harbor Point Fiduciary. We received your notice. Good evening, Mr. Vance, I said. This is a highly irregular instruction. Ms. Gray, Vance said. Your father is the primary trustee. We have standing instructions to process the Stonegate wire at 9. Those instructions are now void pursuant to Article 9, I said. If you move 1 cent of that money without my signature, Mr. Vance, I will sue your bank for aiding and abetting a fiduciary breach, and I will have Judge Red preside over the deposition. There was a pause. I could hear papers shuffling on the other end. Vance was terrified. He knew who Malcolm Red was. Everyone in the legal world knew who Malcolm Red was. We will place a temporary hold on the transaction pending a compliance review, Vance stammered. We are freezing the discretionary accounts effective immediately. Thank you. Mr. Vance? I said. Send me the confirmation number. I hung up. It had worked. The gears had ground to a halt. My father's credit card was declined. His deal was dead in the water. And tomorrow morning, when he tried to swipe his card to pay for his espresso, or when he tried to authorize the wire transfer, the terminal would beep 3 times. Authorization required. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine. I sat on the couch and waited for the sun to rise. I knew the storm was coming. I knew my father would come storming through those elevator doors the moment he found out. But let him come. I had the paperwork, and in the Callahan family, the person with the paperwork always wins. The sun rose over Harbor Point with the deceptive innocence of a typical Wednesday. From my vantage point in the penthouse, the city looked efficient, rhythmic, and awake. I made a pot of coffee. I showered. I dressed in a charcoal gray suit, not the loungewear one typically wears when grounded. I put on my watch. I sat by the window and waited for the clock to strike 9. 9 o'clock in the morning was when the high-value wire transfer window opened at Harbor Point Fiduciary Bank. It was the moment my father, Everett Callahan, intended to send $150 million to the escrow account for the Stonegate acquisition. I sipped my coffee. It was hot and bitter. Somewhere, in the server room of the bank, a digital command would be received. The command would attempt to move a massive block of capital from the Callahan Legacy Trust to an external account. In a normal world, this would take milliseconds. But today was not a normal world. Today, that command would hit a wall I had built overnight. I did not have to see it to know exactly what was happening. I knew the bank's software architecture. When the request hit the system, it would query the authorization protocols. Yesterday, Everett's digital signature would have been enough. Today, the system would see a new flag, a flag labeled Article 9, Dispute Freeze. It would demand a second key. It would demand the biometric signature of Josephine Gray, since I was currently sipping coffee and watching a seagull glide past my window. That signature was not coming. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, but the noise in my imagination was deafening. I could picture the scene in the executive suite 40 floors below. The confusion first, then the irritation, then the panic. At 9:15, the phone on the desk rang. It was not the internal line. It was the direct line from the bank again. Ms. Gray? Arthur Vance's voice was tight. He sounded like a man who had been yelled at for 15 minutes straight. We have received a wire instruction from the primary trustee. Amount is $150 million. Priority 1. Status? I asked calmly. Held, Vance said. Pending dual authorization. The system rejected it automatically based on your notice last night. Good, I said. You are following the law, Mr. Vance. Your father is on the other line, Vance continued. He is displeased. He is claiming it is a technical error. He is demanding an override. Tell him the error code, I said. Tell him it is a code 49 alpha, beneficiary hold. I will relay that, Vance said. He hesitated. Ms. Gray, he is threatening to fire the bank. He cannot fire the bank, I replied, staring at the horizon. Not without my signature. He does not have quorum. Have a good morning. Arthur. I hung up. The first domino had fallen. The deal money was stuck. The deposit deadline was noon. If the money did not hit the Stonegate account by 12 o'clock, the exclusivity period expired. The deal would not just pause. It would die. But I was not done. The freeze provision was a blunt instrument. It did not just catch the big whales, it caught the small fish too. It stopped all discretionary spending. I walked to the kitchen and poured a second cup of coffee. I wondered what my father was doing. Usually, at 9:30, his assistant ordered his lunch from the private club across town. It was always the same order: grilled salmon, sparkling water, billed to the trust's hospitality account. At 9:35, I imagined the assistant staring at a credit card terminal that flashed, declined. She would try again. She would think it was a connection error. She would pull out the backup card, declined. She would call the finance department. Marcus Thorne, the CFO, would check the main corporate card, declined. Rich people do not carry cash. They carry plastic that represents infinite possibility. When that plastic stops working, they do not just feel inconvenienced. They feel naked for the next 2 hours. I sat in the silence of my golden cage. I read a book, though I did not absorb a single word. I was waiting for the inevitable summons. It came at 11 o'clock. The elevator in my foyer chimed. It was the service elevator, the one controlled from the security desk. The doors slid open. Mike, the security guard who had escorted me up yesterday, stepped out. He looked uncomfortable. He held his cap in his hands. "Ms. Gray," he said, "your father wants to see you." "Am I ungrounded?" I asked. "He said to bring you to the main library, immediately." I stood up and smoothed my blazer. "Lead the way, Mike." The ride down was silent. When we stepped out into the main residence, a sprawling mansion that occupied the top 3 floors of the neighboring tower. Connected by a sky bridge, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The staff were nowhere to be seen. They had made themselves scarce, sensing the impending explosion. Mike opened the double mahogany doors to the library. My father was standing by the fireplace. He was not smoking, but he looked like he wanted to burn something down. Bryce was pacing back and forth near the window, his face pale and shiny with sweat. Marcus Thorne was sitting on the edge of a sofa, furiously typing on a tablet. When I entered, the room stopped moving. Everett turned to face me. His face was a mask of controlled fury, but beneath the anger, for the first time in my life, I saw genuine confusion. He looked like a man who had walked through a door he had walked through 1,000 times, only to find a brick wall behind it. "What did you do?" Everett asked. His voice was low, dangerous. "I had some coffee," I said. Walking to the center of the room, I did not sit down. "I enjoyed the view." "Do not play games with me, Josephine," Everett snapped. He slammed a piece of paper onto the heavy oak table. It was a printout of the bank rejection notice. "The wire is blocked. My cards are frozen. The aviation fuel account for the jet is locked out. Even the florist called me 5 minutes ago to say they cannot process the invoice for the gala next week." "That sounds inconvenient," I said. "Inconvenient," Bryce shouted. He stopped pacing and marched toward me. "The Stonegate deal expires in 58 minutes. If that deposit does not clear, we lose the contract. We lose the lock on the ports. Do you have any idea what you are doing?" "I know exactly what I'm doing, Bryce," I said. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was terrified. Not because the company would lose a deal, but because he would lose something. "I am saving the company from a liquidity crisis." "You are destroying this family," Bryce yelled. "Sit down, Bryce," Everett commanded. Bryce froze, then sullenly retreated to the window. Everett walked around the table until he was standing 2 feet from me. He was taller than me, broader. He used his physical presence to intimidate. It had worked on me for 20 years. It did not work today. "You sent a notice to the bank," Everett said. "You invoked Article 9. "I did," I replied. "You claimed I am in breach of my fiduciary duty," he said. "You accused your own father of theft. I accused the primary trustee of self-dealing and reckless endangerment of the trust corpus," I corrected him. "The fact that you are my father is irrelevant to the statute." "I can have that order quashed in an hour," Everett scoffed. "I have lawyers who eat banks for breakfast." "You cannot pay them," I said. The room went silent. "What?" Everett blinked. "The legal retainer is paid from the discretionary fund." I explained. That fund is frozen. Unless you want to pay them out of your personal checking account, which I know you do not keep more than $50,000 in, you cannot hire anyone. The trust pays for your defense, and I have locked the trust. Everett's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. He realized the trap. He was fighting a war, but I had cut off his supply line. He was the king, but I controlled the treasury. Marcus, Everett barked at the CFO. Tell her this is insane. Marcus looked up from his tablet. He looked miserable. Sir, technically, she is right. The bank has received a formal notice of dispute. Under the terms of the Callahan Legacy Trust, once a freezing order is issued by a co-trustee, it cannot be lifted without a joint resolution or a court order. Then get a court order, Everett roared. We cannot go to court today, Marcus whispered. And even if we did, the bank has forwarded the notice to the trust protector. Everett went still. The color drained from his face. Who? He asked. Malcolm Red. I said. The name hung in the air like smoke. You called Malcolm, Everett said. It wasn't a question. It was a realization of horror. He is dead. He has been gone for 20 years. He is retired, I said. He is not dead, and he is very much interested in why the trust is being used to secure a $4 billion loan with a floating interest rate. Everett leaned back against the table. He looked suddenly older. The invincible armor of the billionaire CEO cracked. He looked at Bryce, then at Marcus, then back at me. You are grounded, he muttered. You are supposed to be in your room. I am a co-trustee, I said. I do not have a room. I have a jurisdiction. Bryce looked at his watch. 40 minutes. Dad, we have to do something. If that money does not move. Why are you so worried about the money moving? Bryce, I asked, turning to my brother. Is it because of the deal? Or is it because the consulting firm you hired to advise on the merger has a success fee attached to the deposit? Bryce's eyes widened. I do not know what you are talking about. I think you do, I said. I think if we audit the transaction flow, we will find that a company called Apex Solutions is due to receive $2 million the moment that wire clears. And I think if we look at the registry for Apex Solutions, we will find your college roommate's name. Bryce looked at Everett. Dad, she is lying. She is making this up. Everett did not look at Bryce. He was staring at me with a strange expression. It wasn't pride. It was shock. He was realizing that the quiet girl who sat at the end of the table had been taking notes for years. Undo it, Everett said. His voice was flat. Josephine, call the bank. Rescind the notice. We can talk about the board seat. We can talk about your salary. Just release the funds. No, I said. I am ordering you, he said. You cannot order me, I said. I am not your employee right now. I am your partner. And as your partner, I am voting no. You are killing the deal, Everett said. I am killing the risk, I said. The deal was bad. Dad, you knew it. The numbers did not work. You were doing it for the vanity. You were doing it to see your picture in the paper. I am not going to let you bankrupt this family for a headline. It is my money, Everett shouted, slamming his hand on the table again. I made it. I grew it. It is grandfather's money, I said quietly, and it belongs to the future, not to your ego. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed. 11:30. 30 minutes, Marcus murmured. Everett looked at the phone. He looked at me. He realized he had no leverage. He couldn't threaten to fire me. He already had. He couldn't cut off my money. I had cut off his. He couldn't use force. The security guards were witnesses, and Malcolm Red was watching from afar. He had been checkmated by a piece of paper he had ignored for decades. He took a deep breath and straightened his tie. He tried to regain his composure, to put the mask of the CEO back on. You think you are smart, Everett said, his voice dripping with venom. You think you have pulled off some great coup, but you have just started a war you cannot finish. When the board finds out you sabotaged a major acquisition, they will never let you near the company again. The board has a fiduciary duty too, I said. When they see the real numbers, they will thank me. You are delusional, Everett spat. You are a little girl playing with a loaded gun. And you are a man who just had his credit card declined, I said. He flinched. It was a small movement, but it was there. The sting of the truth. The wire is not going out, I said finality. Stonegate is dead. You can call the sellers and tell them you got cold feet, or you can tell them the bank had a compliance issue. I do not care what lie you tell them, but the money stays where it is. I turned to leave. Where are you going? Everett demanded. Back to my room, I said. I am still grounded. Remember. I walked to the door. Mike opened it for me. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. I could feel Bryce's panic and Everett's rage. Just as I stepped into the hallway, Everett spoke. You think you won? He asked. His voice echoed in the large, wood-paneled room. I stopped. I did not turn around. I looked at the marble floor, at the reflection of the chandelier above. No, Dad, I said. I do not think I won. I think I just prevented an accident. I walked out. The heavy doors closed behind me with a solid, final thud. I walked back to the elevator. My hands were shaking. Just a little. Not from fear. From the release of tension. I had stood in the fire, and I had not burned. I checked my watch. 11:35. In 25 minutes, the Stonegate deal would expire. The penalty clauses would vanish. The debt would never be issued. The family fortune was safe. My father was grounded. My brother was exposed. And I was the only one in the building who could sign a check. The silence in the elevator was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The thing about money is that it makes a lot of noise when it moves. But it makes even more noise when it stops. When I froze the Callahan Legacy Trust, I didn't just pause a bank transfer. I stopped the heartbeat of the Callahan Meridian Group. For 30 years, my father had run this company on momentum and fear. He moved capital so fast that nobody ever had time to check the receipts. He treated the corporate treasury and the family trust like two pockets in the same pair of trousers, shifting cash back and forth to plug holes wherever they appeared. But now, the trousers were locked in a vault, and without the constant flow of liquidity to cover his tracks, the truth started to seep out like oil from a cracked engine block. The fallout began at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because the Stonegate acquisition had officially failed to close by the noon deadline. The internal machinery of CMG finally woke up. The freeze provision I had triggered automatically mandated a review by the Internal Risk Committee. Usually, this committee was a joke. It was staffed by 3 executives who were terrified of my father and 1 external auditor who was paid to look the other way. But today, they couldn't look away. Harbor Point Fiduciary Bank had flagged the account. The trust protector, Malcolm Red, had been notified. The spotlight was on, and the cockroaches were scrambling. I attended the meeting remotely from the penthouse library. My father had cut my physical access to the conference room, but he couldn't legally block a co-trustee from a fiduciary hearing. The faces on the video screen looked pale. There was Marcus Thorne, the CFO, looking like he might vomit. There was the head of legal, scanning documents with frantic energy, and there was my father, sitting at the head of the table, his arms crossed, staring at the camera lens as if he could strangle me through the fiber optic cable. "The acquisition is dead," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "We missed the window. The sellers have walked." "Good," I said, my voice coming through their speakers clearly. "We dodged a bullet. Now, we need to discuss why the gun was pointed at our heads in the first place." "This is a formality," Everett snapped. "Josephine has triggered a hostile action based on a misunderstanding of the trust's liquidity. We will resolve this. The freeze will be lifted, and she will be removed from her position for incompetence. I am looking at the new documents provided by the bank," I said, ignoring his threat. "Naomi Klein sent them over 10 minutes ago. Dad, why didn't you disclose the breakup fee?" The room went silent. In the previous board meetings, The breakup fee, the penalty CMG would have to pay if we walked away from the deal, was listed as $5 million. Standard. Painful. But standard. But the document on my screen, the actual letter of intent signed by Everett Callahan 3 days ago, told a different story. $50 million, I read aloud. You agreed to a $50 million breakup fee if the funding failed. And since the funding failed because the trust refused to collateralize it, that debt is now due. It was a negotiating tactic, Everett shouted, to show them we were serious. It was reckless, I said. And since you signed it without board approval and without trust consent, you just created a $50 million liability for this family. That is not just bad business. Dad, that is cause for removal. Everett stood up and severed the video connection. The screen went black. He thought cutting the feed would stop the investigation. He was wrong. The data was already on my server. I spent the next 3 hours digging. The freeze gave me something I never had before: the authority to demand the raw data. The bank, terrified of liability, was dumping everything into my secure folder. Every transfer, every withdrawal, every guarantee made by the trust in the last 5 years. It was worse than I thought. I found a margin loan. 2 years ago, Everett had taken out a personal line of credit for $20 million to cover lifestyle expansion. He had used his status as trustee to pledge family assets as security. If the market had dipped just 10% last year, the bank would have liquidated our oldest warehouse properties to pay his bill. Then came the report from Malcolm Red. I hadn't spoken to the former judge yet, but his team was working fast. A secure email arrived at 4:30. It was an audit of the charitable giving section of the trust. My father loved to be seen as a philanthropist. He gave millions to the opera, to the art museum, to the gala circuit. We all thought it was for tax write-offs. Malcolm's audit painted a different picture. The donations were strategically placed: $100,000 to a foundation run by a senator who was blocking a trucking regulation, $200,000 to a charity chaired by a journalist who was writing a biography of Everett. These weren't gifts, they were bribes. And he had used the trust money meant for his grandchildren to buy his own popularity. I was deep in the spreadsheets when I heard the elevator chime. I stiffened, expecting security, expecting Everett to come and physically throw me out. But when the doors opened, it was my mother. Lillian Callahan was wearing a beige cashmere cardigan and holding a tray. On the tray was a teapot and a sandwich. She looked tired. The perfect executive wife mask was slipping, revealing the exhausted woman underneath. She set the tray on the desk. She didn't look at the computer screens. She looked at me. "You haven't eaten all day," she said softly. "I'm not hungry." "Mom," I said. She sat down on the leather sofa. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was wrinkled, as if she had been clutching it for hours. "I saw the email," she said. "Which one?" I asked. "There are a lot of emails flying around today." "The one your father sent to the house staff," she said. "The one instructing the security team to treat you as a hostile entity. The one banning you from the kitchen, the garage, and the office." She smoothed the paper on her lap. "He grounded you, Josephine," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "when you were 16, and you took the car without asking. We grounded you. We took your keys. We told you to stay in your room to think about safety." She looked up, her eyes wet. "But this isn't parenting. He didn't send this to me. He sent it to the employees. He told the guards to keep you upstairs. He told the driver to ignore your calls. He is trying to break me." "Mom," I said. "I know," she whispered. "I have watched him do it to competitors for 40 years. I have watched him do it to unions. I have watched him do it to partners." She took a shuddering breath. "But I never thought he would do it to his own daughter." "He needs me to sign a paper," I said. "He thinks if he makes me miserable enough, I will sign it." "Don't," Lillian said. I looked at her in surprise. My mother, the peacemaker, the woman who always said, "Just do what your father wants. It is easier." "Don't sign it," she repeated, stronger this time. I heard him on the phone with Bryce. They are scared. Josephine, they are not talking about the business. They are talking about covering their tracks. She stood up and walked to the door. I am not a businesswoman. I don't understand the trusts and the shares. But I know that a father who treats his child like an enemy combatant does not deserve to win. You stay here. I will tell the staff that if anyone tries to starve you out, they answer to me. She left. I looked at the closed elevator doors. My mother hadn't given me legal advice, but she had given me something better. She had confirmed that the moral high ground was mine. I turned back to the computer. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the room. The phone rang. It was the internal line. Josephine, it was Everett. Hello, Dad, I said. You are fired, he said. I am terminating your employment for cause, insubordination, corporate sabotage, unauthorized access to sensitive data. Pack your things. Security will escort you out of the building in 10 minutes. You cannot fire me, I said calmly. I am the CEO, he roared. I can fire anyone. You can fire Josephine Gray, the director of risk strategy, I agreed. But you cannot fire Josephine Gray, the co-trustee of the Callahan Legacy Trust. And since the trust owns 51% of the voting shares of CMG, I am effectively your boss right now. If you try to remove me from the building while I'm conducting a fiduciary review, I will file an emergency injunction with the Delaware Court of Chancery. I will have a judge remove you from the CEO seat by tomorrow morning. There was a heavy silence on the line. He knew I was right. He knew the law better than anyone, which is why he hated it so much when it was used against him. You are ungrateful, he hissed. I gave you everything. You gave me a trust fund, I said. And you taught me how to read. That was your mistake. I hung up. I was winning the battle with Everett, but there was something else nagging at me. Something about Bryce. My mother had said Bryce was scared, not angry, scared. Why if the deal failed? Bryce lost a win on his resume. He lost some face, but he was still the heir. He was still the golden boy. Why was he pacing in the library like a trapped animal? Why was he making secret calls? I pulled up the file on the Stonegate deal again. I ignored the big numbers, the billions, the interest rates. I started looking at the small numbers, the transaction costs, the fees. There was a line item for strategic consulting, $2 million, payable upon the execution of the letter of intent. The money had already gone out. It was paid yesterday, before the freeze. The recipient was a firm called Apex Solutions, LLC. I ran a search on Apex Solutions. It was a Delaware entity, registered 6 months ago. The address was a PBO box in Wilmington. The registered agent was a generic corporate service. It looked like a standard shell company used for legitimate tax purposes. But something bothered me. The invoice from Apex Solutions was time-stamped 3 minutes after the letter of intent was signed. It was too fast. I logged into the internal compliance database. As the former director of risk, I still had my backdoor access to the vendor vetting system. I typed in Apex Solutions. The system flagged it. Low-level clearance, no background check on file. Override authorized by Executive VP. Authorized by Bryce Callahan. I dug deeper. I followed the payment routing number. The $2 million went to the Delaware account, sat there for an hour, and then was wired to an account in the Cayman Islands. I couldn't see the owner of the Cayman account. That was the point of the Caymans. But I could see the metadata of the invoice. I downloaded the PDF of the bill Apex sent us. I right-clicked and opened the file properties. The author of the PDF was not Apex Solutions. The author was B. Callahan Private. I stared at the screen. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Bryce hadn't just hired a consultant. Bryce was the consultant. He had set up a shell company to skim $2 million off the top of the deal. He had convinced Dad to sign a $50 million breakup fee so that he could secure his $2 million success fee up front. He wasn't doing this for the family legacy. He wasn't doing this to prove himself to Dad. He was stealing. I sat back in my chair, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Oh, Bryce, I whispered to the empty room. You didn't just want the throne. You wanted to sell the castle and keep the commission. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging. You don't know who you are messing with. It was Bryce. He knew I was in the system. He knew I could see the breadcrumbs. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot of the text. I took a screenshot of the file properties. I saved everything to an external drive. My father was a narcissist who played fast and loose with the rules. But my brother was a common thief. The freeze had done more than stop a bad deal. It had drained the water from the swamp, and now I was looking at the monsters at the bottom. I picked up the phone to call Naomi Klein. "Naomi," I said when she answered, "get Malcolm Red on the line. We have a criminal problem." The family drama was over. The crime story had just begun. The boardroom on the 42nd floor had always been a place of theater. It was where my father performed his greatness, where my brother performed his charm, and where I was expected to perform my obedience. But tonight, the room was stripped of its pageantry. The mahogany table was no longer a stage. It was an operating table, and I was about to cut out the rot. I had called the meeting for 7 o'clock in the evening. The invitation was mandatory. Under the bylaws of the trust, when a co-trustee alleges criminal misconduct, the primary trustee and the beneficiaries are required to attend a formal inquiry. The room was cold. The air conditioning was humming on overdrive, battling the humidity of the impending storm outside. I arrived 5 minutes early. I wanted to be seated before they walked in. I wanted them to see that I was not the defendant. To my right sat Naomi Klein. She wore a dark blue suit and an expression of grim determination. In front of her was a stack of notarized files. To my left was a court reporter I had hired, a woman named Sarah, who was already typing into her steno machine, capturing the silence. But the most imposing presence in the room was not physical. It was digital. At the far end of the table, a massive high-definition screen was active. On it, larger than life, was the live video feed of Malcolm Red. The former judge sat in his study in Montana, surrounded by walls of books. He did not look like a retired man. He looked like an old lion watching a herd of gazelles, waiting for the weak one to stumble. The double doors opened. Everett walked in first. He walked with a stiff, angry gait, refusing to look at the screen where Malcolm watched. He looked only at me. Behind him came Bryce. Bryce looked terrible. His tan seemed to have grayed. His tie was loosened, and his eyes were darting around the room, assessing the exits, assessing the threats. He spotted the court reporter and flinched. "This is ridiculous," Everett announced, throwing his leather folio onto the table. "A tribunal. In my own company, Josephine, you have taken this game too far. Please sit down, Everett." Malcolm Red's voice boomed from the speakers. It was a deep, gravelly baritone that instantly silenced the room. "And please remember that this proceeding is being recorded for the trust archives." Everett's jaw tightened, but he sat. Bryce hovered near the door. "Josephine," Bryce said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He walked toward me, ignoring the others. "Can I have a word? Just us in the hallway for a second." I looked at him. I saw the sweat beading on his upper lip. I saw the desperation. He wanted to cut a deal. He wanted to offer me a piece of the pie, or beg for mercy, or threaten me. It didn't matter. "Anything you have to say to me, Bryce, you can say to the trust protector," I said, keeping my voice level. "Come on, Joe," he hissed, leaning in close. "Don't do this. We are family. If you drop this, I can get Dad to reinstate your badge. We can split the bonus. Just turn off the screen." "Sit down, Mr. Callahan," Naomi Klein said sharply, "or we will note your non-compliance in the record." Bryce glared at me, a flash of pure hatred in his eyes, before he slumped into the chair next to our father. "Let us begin," Malcolm said from the screen. "The co-trustee has alleged that the Stonegate acquisition was not merely a high-risk venture, but a vehicle for self-dealing. Everett, you are accused of negligence. Bryce, you are accused of something far worse." "I resent that," Everett snapped. "I was trying to grow this company. I was willing to put my own reputation on the line." "We are not here to discuss your reputation," Dad, I said. I stood up and picked up the remote control for the projector. We are here to discuss a company called Apex Solutions. I pressed the button. The side screen lit up. It displayed a flowchart I had constructed earlier that afternoon. It was simple. It showed the $300 million credit line CMG was securing. It showed the transaction fees. And it showed a bright red line connecting the CMG treasury to a small, obscure box labeled Apex Solutions, LLC. $2 million, I said. That was the consulting fee paid to Apex Solutions yesterday. It was authorized by the Executive Vice President, Bryce Callahan, for strategic advisory services related to the merger. I looked at Bryce. He was staring at the table, gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. We use consultants all the time, Everett said dismissively. So Bryce hired an outside firm to vet the deal. That is standard procedure. It is standard, I agreed. If the firm is real, I clicked the remote. The screen changed. It showed the corporate registration documents for Apex Solutions. Apex has no employees, I said. It has no website. It has no history of consulting on logistics deals. It was incorporated 6 months ago in Delaware, and until yesterday, its bank account had a balance of 0. So it is a boutique firm, Bryce blurted out. They value privacy. They are niche specialists. They are very niche, I said, because they only have one client, us. I walked around the table, moving closer to where my father and brother sat. I wanted Everett to see the evidence clearly. I wanted him to look at the screen, not at me. I traced the payment, I continued. The $2 million went into the Apex account at 10 o'clock in the morning. At 11 o'clock, it was transferred to a numbered account in the Cayman Islands. That proves nothing, Bryce said, his voice rising in pitch. That is just tax optimization. You are just throwing mud because you are jealous. Josephine. You are jealous that Dad put me in charge of the biggest deal in company history, and you were left checking the fire extinguishers. Everett looked at Bryce, then at me. His instinct was to protect the son. His instinct was to believe that I was the bitter, vindictive daughter. Josephine, Everett said sternly, if this is just speculation, I will have you removed from the trust permanently. You cannot accuse your brother of theft without proof. I am not speculating, I said. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen displayed a PDF. It was the invoice Apex Solutions had sent to CMG, but I had zoomed in on the metadata, the digital fingerprint left behind by the creator of the file. I pulled this from the server, I said. This is the original invoice file. It was not created by a consultant in Delaware. It was created on a laptop registered to B. Callahan Private. I paused to let the words sink in. And just to be sure, I added, I checked the IP address of the upload. The invoice was uploaded to our system from a residential IP address in Harbor Point, specifically from the Wi-Fi network at the Meridian Spire penthouse, my penthouse, where Bryce was visiting me last week when he borrowed my Wi-Fi password. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the rhythmic clacking of the court reporter's keys. I turned to Bryce. You created the invoice. Bryce, you set up the shell company. You convinced Dad to agree to a $50 million breakup fee so that you could rush the deal and collect your $2 million skim before anyone noticed. Bryce opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping on a dock. Everett slowly turned his head to look at his son. It was a look of agonizing slow-motion realization. He was waiting for Bryce to laugh. He was waiting for Bryce to explain it away, to say it was a mistake, a prank, a misunderstanding. Bryce, Everett said softly. Bryce licked his lips. Dad, listen, it's complicated. I was going to put it back. It was just, I have some debts, personal debts. The guys I owe, they don't take payment plans. I needed the cash fast. You stole from the company, Everett whispered. The titan of industry, the man who terrified Wall Street, sounded like a broken old man. You used me. You used my signature to steal from our family. I didn't mean to hurt the deal, Bryce cried, his composure shattering. I just needed the fee I thought the deal would go through. And nobody would care about $2 million. It's rounding error, Dad. You spill more than that on dinner. It is not rounding error, Naomi Klein spoke up. Her voice was sharp, cutting through Bryce's hysteria. It is fraud, and it is a violation of the conflict of interest clause in the trust bylaws. She looked directly at Bryce. Mr. Callahan, did you disclose your beneficial interest in Apex Solutions to the board or the trustees prior to authorizing the payment? No, Bryce whispered. Then you are in breach, Naomi said. She made a note on her file. Everett slumped back in his chair. He looked small. For decades, he had believed in his own myth that he was building a dynasty, that his children were extensions of his own brilliance. He had groomed Bryce to be the king, and now he realized he had groomed a petty thief. He looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked ashamed, and that shame was more dangerous than his rage. You knew, Everett said to me. You knew this yesterday. I suspected, I said. I confirmed it today. Why didn't you tell me privately? He asked. Why did you do this here with the lawyers, with him? He gestured weakly at the screen where Malcolm Red watched. Because you wouldn't have listened, I said. If I had told you privately, you would have covered it up. You would have paid the money back yourself and buried the evidence to save the family name. And Bryce would have learned that he can get away with anything. I placed my hands on the table. I am not doing this to destroy the family. Dad, I said. I am doing this to save the company. There are 5,000 people who work for CMG. They have families. They have mortgages. They rely on us to be competent. We cannot let the company be a piggy bank for Bryce's gambling debts or your ego. Malcolm Red cleared his throat. The sound rumbled through the room. I have heard enough, Malcolm said. The evidence is conclusive. Bryce Callahan has committed fraud against the trust. But, Everett, the ultimate responsibility lies with you. You signed the checks. You ignored the risk assessments. You allowed this culture of negligence to fester because it suited your vanity. Everett looked up at the screen, his jaw working. I am the CEO. I built this. You are the trustee, Malcolm corrected. And you have failed in your fiduciary duty to protect the assets from internal threats. Therefore, under the authority granted to me by the trust deed, I am issuing an immediate suspension. You can't, Everett gasped. I can, and I am, Malcolm said. Effective immediately, Everett Callahan is suspended from all investment decisions regarding trust assets. All voting rights attached to the trust shares are transferred to a temporary independent committee. You remain CEO in title, Everett, but you cannot sign a contract worth more than $10,000 without co-signature from Josephine and Naomi. It was the death knell. Everett wasn't fired, but he was castrated. He was a king without a sword. This meeting is adjourned, Malcolm said. I expect the formal paperwork to be signed by morning. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy. Naomi began packing her files. The court reporter stopped typing. Bryce stood up, his legs shaking. He didn't look at Dad. He didn't look at me. He just walked out of the room, looking like a ghost. I watched him go. I felt no triumph, just a hollow ache in my chest. He was my brother. We used to play hide-and-seek in the warehouse. Now, I had just effectively ended his life as he knew it. Everett remained in his chair. He was staring at the blank screen. I walked over to him. I didn't know what to say. Dad. He turned his head slowly. The look he gave me was chilling. It wasn't hate. It was a total lack of recognition. You planned this, he said. You let him walk into the trap. You let me walk into the trap. I warned you, I said. I warned you in the boardroom. I warned you in your office. You chose not to listen. You went behind my back, he said, his voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and bitterness. I am your father, and you went behind my back to the lawyers. I looked him in the eye. I was done apologizing for being the only adult in the room. No, Dad, I said softly. I didn't go behind your back. I went behind your delusion. I turned and walked toward the door. Naomi was waiting for me. "That was brutal," Naomi whispered as we walked into the hallway. "It was surgery," I said. "It hurts, but the patient will live." I didn't look back. I knew my father was still sitting there, alone at the head of the table, realizing that for the first time in 40 years, he wasn't the one holding the gavel. The morning sun did not bring clarity to Harbor Point. It brought the sharks. By 7 o'clock in the morning, the news vans were already parked 3 deep on the street below the Callahan Meridian Group Tower. I watched them from the penthouse window. Tiny ants swarming a picnic basket, the rumor mill, usually a slow drip in our industry, had turned into a fire hose. Someone had leaked. The headlines scrolling across the financial news networks were brutal. Logistics. Giant stumbles. Callahan merger in jeopardy. Internal family feud freezes billions. I looked at the stock ticker on my tablet. CMG was down 8% in pre-market trading. That was $300 million of market capitalization evaporated before the opening bell even rang. In the world of high finance, uncertainty is expensive, and right now, my family was the most expensive uncertainty in America. I was no longer grounded. The security guards who had blocked my path yesterday were now looking at me with a mixture of fear and respect. The freeze order I had sent to the bank had done more than lock accounts. It had shifted the gravity of the entire building. I took the elevator down to the executive floor. The atmosphere was funereal. People were whispering in corners, clutching coffees, eyes darting toward the corner office. They knew the king was wounded, but they didn't know if he was dead. I walked past my father's office. The glass walls were frosted over. He had activated the privacy shade, but I could hear him. "Get me the crisis team at Sterling Cooper," Everett was shouting. "I want a press conference at noon. I want a statement that says the deal is merely delayed for technical due diligence." I paused. I knew what was about to happen. I walked into the adjacent room where his executive assistant, a terrified woman named Sarah, was holding a phone away from her ear. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for help. I am trying. Mr. Callahan," Sarah stammered into the intercom. "But Sterling Cooper is asking for the retainer. They say the wire from yesterday was returned." "Tell them I am Everett Callahan," my father roared through the speaker. "Tell them I am good for it." "They say their policy is strict, sir," Sarah whispered. $50,000 up front for crisis management. They tried to run the corporate card. It was declined. Code 49. Code 49. The freeze. My father was trying to fight a media war, but I had confiscated his ammunition. He wanted to spin the narrative, to tell the world that everything was fine, but he couldn't even buy a microphone. I walked over to Sarah's desk. "Tell him the board is meeting in boardroom B in 20 minutes, I said softly. "Tell him the PR can wait," Sarah nodded, relief washing over her face. She didn't want to be the one to tell the emperor he was naked. The emergency board meeting was not called by my father. It was called by the independent directors. These were men and women who usually showed up 4 times a year to eat catered lunches and rubber stamp my father's decisions. Today, they looked like a firing squad. The room was tense. The air conditioning was set to Arctic. But the directors were sweating. They were terrified of one thing: shareholder lawsuits. If the stock dropped another 10%, the pension funds would start suing for mismanagement. I entered the room. Normally, as the director of risk strategy, I sat against the wall. Today, the chairman of the audit committee, a stern man named Arthur Pym, gestured to an empty seat at the table. "Ms. Gray," Pym said, "thank you for joining us." Everett entered a moment later. He looked haggard. He was wearing the same suit as yesterday, which was unheard of for him. He glared at me, then took his seat at the head of the table. But the seat didn't seem to command the room anymore. "This panic is unnecessary," Everett announced, trying to project his usual booming confidence. "The market is overreacting to a minor administrative hiccup with the trust. The Stonegate deal is still viable. I just need the board to authorize an emergency bridge loan to cover the deposit while we sort out the trust issues." "We are not authorizing a dime, Everett," Pym said coldly. Not until we understand why the trust protector has suspended your voting rights. That is a family matter, Everett snapped. It is being resolved. It is a disclosure matter, Pim corrected him. If the controlling shareholder is paralyzed by allegations of fraud, we have a duty to report it to the SEC. If we hide this, we all go to jail. He turned to me. Ms. Gray, you initiated the freeze. You have the floor. I stood up. I didn't have notes. I didn't need them. I had lived this reality for 5 years. The issue is not just the trust, I said, my voice steady. The issue is systemic risk. The Stonegate deal was structured on a foundation of sand. The revenue projections were inflated. The debt service coverage ratio was barely 1.1. If we had closed that deal yesterday, given the market volatility this morning, we would be in technical default by next Friday. I looked around the table. I tried to flag this in the risk committee. I was overruled. I was silenced. So I used the only lever I had left to protect the shareholders. You protected the shareholders by crashing the stock, one of the directors asked skeptically. I crashed the stock temporarily to prevent the company from crashing permanently, I replied. A 10% drop is a correction. A bankruptcy filing is a funeral. She is exaggerating, Everett shouted. Marcus, tell them the numbers work. All eyes turned to Marcus Thorne, the CFO. Marcus had been my father's right hand for a decade. He was the man who moved the numbers around to make the pictures look pretty. But Marcus was also a man who knew how to read the wind. He looked at Everett, who was currently suspended and powerless. He looked at me, who held the keys to the trust, and he looked at the angry board members who were worried about their own liability. Marcus made a choice. Actually, Marcus said, his voice quiet. Josephine is correct. Everett froze. What did you say? The liquidity position is tighter than we reported, Marcus said, looking down at his hands. We have been using operational cash flow to cover the debt service on the older bonds, and there is the matter of the personal loans. Marcus, Everett warned. I have to disclose it. Everett, Marcus said, his voice gaining a desperate strength. The board asked for full transparency. 2 years ago, the CEO took out a personal margin loan against his equity to fund external lifestyle expenses. He pledged his personal CMG shares. If the stock drops below $40, the bank issues a margin call. He will have to sell shares to cover it. That would trigger a further sell-off. The room erupted in gasps. You leveraged your own equity, Pim asked, horrified. Without telling the board, you put the company specifically at risk of a death spiral, just to renovate your houses. I had it under control, Everett insisted, though his voice was cracking. The stock was strong. Until today, I said. Today the stock is at 42. You are $2 away from losing your position. Dad, that is why you are desperate for the bridge loan. You aren't trying to save the deal. You are trying to prop up the price so you don't get liquidated. Everett slumped in his chair. The truth was out. He wasn't just an aggressive businessman. He was a gambler who had bet the house and lost. Where is Bryce? Pim asked suddenly. The executive vice president was the lead on the Stonegate deal. He should be here to answer for the diligence. We all looked at the empty chair next to Everett. I called him 3 times. Sarah, the assistant, said from the corner of the room. His phone goes straight to voicemail. His administrative assistant says he didn't come in today. He is not coming, I said. He is likely contacting a lawyer. Why? Pim asked. Because he took a $2 million kickback on the deal, I said. We have the digital trail. It is part of the file I submitted to the trust protector. The board members looked at each other in stunned silence. The Callahan dynasty wasn't just cracking. It was dissolving into a puddle of greed and incompetence right before their eyes. Then, the door opened. My mother, Lillian Callahan, walked in. She was not a member of the board. Usually, she only came to the office for holiday parties. But today, she walked in with her head high. She was holding a tablet. Lillian, Everett said, looking at her as if she were a ghost. This is a closed meeting. I am a major shareholder, Lillian said. I hold 10% of the voting stock in my own name, separate from the trust. I have a right to speak. She walked to the end of the table and stood next to me. I have been silent for 30 years, Lillian said. Her voice was soft, but in the acoustic perfection of the boardroom, it carried like a bell. I let Everett run this company because I believed he was building something for our children. I believed the long hours and the missed birthdays were the price of security. She looked at Everett. But yesterday, I saw a security guard block my daughter from entering her own kitchen. I saw a father try to starve his child into submission because she dared to tell the truth. She turned to the board. I have read the audit report from Malcolm Red. I have seen the emails. I cannot support this management anymore. Lillian, don't, Everett begged. We can fix this. It's just a rough patch. It is not a rough patch, Everett, she said. It is a rot. I am formally seconding the motion for an independent forensic audit of all company and trust finances, and I am placing my voting proxy with Josephine. It was the final blow. Everett had lost the bank. He had lost the board. And now, he had lost his wife. The family shield he used to hide behind the image of the benevolent patriarch was gone. Arthur Pym cleared his throat. He looked at me with a new seriousness. Ms. Gray, Pym said, if we proceed with an audit, the market will panic even more. We need a solution. We need to stop the bleeding today. What do you propose? I walked to the whiteboard. I picked up a marker. We execute a strategic retreat, I said. We do not try to save the Stonegate deal. We kill it, but we do not pay the breakup fee. The contract is signed, the general counsel argued. If we walk, we owe them $50 million. We don't have the cash. We claim force majeure based on a fiduciary breach, I said, uncapping the marker. I have drafted a letter with Naomi Klein. We argue that the letter of intent was signed by an unauthorized agent, Everett, who was acting outside the scope of his powers under the trust covenants. We argue that the deal was void ab initio because it relied on collateral he did not have the authority to pledge. I wrote void on the board. It will be a legal fight, I admitted. Stonegate will sue, but it will tie the issue up in court for 2 years. By the time it is resolved, we will have restructured our debt. The market hates uncertainty, but it hates a bad deal even more. If we announce today that we are walking away to preserve shareholder value and launching an internal cleanup, the stock will stabilize. It is a bold play, Pym said. You are effectively publicly disowning your father's authority to save the company. I am reestablishing the company's authority over its own governance, I said. Pym looked at the other directors. They nodded. They were desperate for a lifeline, and I had just thrown them a rope. One question, Ms. Gray, Pym said. He leaned forward. To do this, to trigger this legal defense, you have to use the voting power of the trust to override the CEO. You have to formally vote against your father in a public record. He paused. Do you have the stomach for that? Can you actually pull the trigger? The room went quiet. Even the hum of the projector seemed to fade. Everett was looking at me. His eyes were no longer angry. They were pleading. He was silently asking me to remember the pony he bought me when I was 10. He was asking me to remember the family vacations. He was asking me to be his daughter first, and a fiduciary second. But I also remembered the badge on his desk. I remembered the security guard. I remembered the text from Bryce. I remembered the emptiness of my mother's eyes for the last 20 years. I looked at Pym. Mr. Pym, I said. If I wasn't going to use it, I wouldn't have read the trust. I turned to the corporate secretary. Record the vote. The Callahan Legacy Trust votes no on the acquisition and yes on the restructuring motion. The pen scratched across the paper. It was done. The Titan had cracked, and for the first time in the history of the Callahan Meridian Group, the person steering the ship wasn't looking for applause. She was looking at the radar. The boardroom was clearing out. The directors were shuffling their papers, eager to escape the radioactive fallout zone. My mother had left. squeezing my hand briefly before walking out with a dignity that shamed everyone else in the room. Only 3 people remained: Everett and the digital ghost of Malcolm Red, still watching from the screen at the end of the table. "Close the door. Josephine," Malcolm said. His voice was no longer the booming gavel of a judge. It was quieter, sadder. "There is one more piece of business, something Silas asked me to keep until the event of trigger." Everett looked up. He looked deflated. The fight had drained out of him, leaving behind a shell of confusion. "What event?" he mumbled. "Is this another clause, another trap?" "It is not a trap, Everett," Malcolm said. "It is a letter. Your father wrote it 3 days before he died. He placed it in a sealed envelope in my custody, with instructions to open it only if a beneficiary successfully invoked the special oversight clause against you." Everett flinched. "He knew." "He suspected," Malcolm corrected. "Silas loved you, Everett, but he saw you clearly. He saw the hunger. He saw the way you looked at the company not as a machine to build value, but as a mirror to reflect your own face." On the screen, Malcolm held up a yellowed envelope. He broke the wax seal. The sound of tearing paper was loud in the silent room. "I am going to read it into the record," Malcolm said. He began to read. "To my son. Everett, if this letter is being read, it means you have lost your way. It means you have tried to eat the seed corn. It means you have forgotten that the money is not yours. It is a loan from the unborn. I have set the trap at age 28 for Josephine because she has the eyes of an auditor. She does not look for applause. She looks for cracks. I pray she never has to use this power. But if she does, it is because you have forced her to choose between her inheritance and her integrity." Everett was staring at the table. His hands were shaking. "But there is a reason I put the voting power in the trust, and not in your hands. Everett, it is not just about your ego. It is about the lie." The word hung in the air. The lie. "What lie?" I asked, looking at the screen. Malcolm put down the letter and picked up a separate file folder. "This is the part that never made it into the Forbes profiles," he said. "The self-made legend story has a hole in it." He opened the folder. In 1982, when the company was just a struggling trucking firm, Silas didn't invent the logistical tracking algorithm that made CMG famous. He didn't write the code that allowed for real-time fleet management. That patent number 4409 was filed by a man named Elias Thorne. I looked at the name, Thorne. Marcus Thorne's father. I asked, the realization hitting me like a slap. "Yes," Malcolm said. "Elias was the genius. Silas was the salesman. They were partners. But when the technology started to work, when the big contracts started coming in, Silas panicked. He didn't want to share the glory. And more importantly, you, Everett, you were just joining the company, then you pushed him." Malcolm looked directly at my father. "The records show that you, Everett, advised your father to cut Elias out. You convinced Silas that Elias was unstable, a liability. You forced a buyout. You paid Elias pennies on the dollar and buried his name." Everett stood up. "That is history. That was 40 years ago. Elias was a drunk. We saved the company from him." "You didn't just buy him out," Malcolm continued, his voice relentless. 10 years later, when Elias tried to sue, you used the trust. You authorized a settlement of $5 million to purchase silence. You classified it as a consulting fee. Does that sound familiar? I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the exact same playbook Bryce had used: the fake consulting fee, the hush money, the erasure of the truth. "Marcus knows," I whispered. "Does Marcus Thorne know his father was the real inventor?" "He suspects," Malcolm said. "That is why you keep him close, isn't it, Everett? That is why Marcus has been CFO for so long despite his mediocrity. You aren't employing him. You are paying him a salary to keep him from asking questions about his inheritance." Everett sank back into his chair. He looked broken. The myth of the great man was dissolving. He wasn't a visionary. He was just a man who had stood on the shoulders of a ghost and then kicked the ladder away. "I did it for the family," Everett said. His voice was a rasp. Elias would have ruined us. He would have sold the patent to the first bidder. I secured the legacy. I built the empire so you could live in a penthouse. Josephine. So Bryce could have his cars. I did the dirty work so you could keep your hands clean. You didn't do it for the family, I said quietly. You did it for the image. You couldn't stand the idea that the Callahan genius was actually a Thorne genius. You wanted the credit. I walked over to the window. The city below was moving on, indifferent to our tragedy. This is the breach, Everett, Malcolm said formally. It is not just the Stonegate deal. It is a pattern of using trust assets to cover personal moral failures. The settlement with Elias Thorne was a misuse of funds. The margin loan was a misuse of funds. The bribery masquerading as charity was a misuse of funds. Malcolm closed the file. My preliminary finding is gross misconduct, Malcolm stated. Under Article 12, I have the authority to remove you permanently as trustee. I can strip you of all control. Everett looked up. You can't. The board won't allow it. The market will crash. The market is already crashing, I said, turning back to face him. The only way to stop it is to cut the cancer out. I walked to the table and sat down across from him. I am giving you a choice, Dad, I said. He looked at me with tired, watery eyes. Option A, I said. We go to court. Malcolm files the full report. The Elias Thorne story comes out. The Bryce fraud comes out. The margin loans come out. You will be removed by a judge. You will be humiliated. The SEC will investigate. You might even go to prison for securities fraud. Everett flinched. Option B, I continued. You resign? Today? You step down as trustee citing health reasons. You retire as CEO. You appoint an interim successor, someone the market trusts. You agree to a full restructuring of the trust governance. In exchange, the files are sealed. Bryce's theft is repaid quietly from your personal equity. The Elias Thorne story stays in the dark. You want me to walk away? Everett whispered. From my own company. It is not your company anymore, I said. It hasn't been for a long time. It belongs to the trust, and the trust belongs to the truth. He looked at the badge on the table, the badge he had demanded from me yesterday. I grounded you, he murmured. I thought if I took your phone, you would break. You were always so quiet. I was listening, I said. He looked at Malcolm. Is this what Silas wanted? Silas wanted the company to survive. Malcolm said, He knew you would build it, Everett, but he also knew you would eventually try to destroy it to save your own skin. He wrote the trust to stop you from committing suicide. Everett closed his eyes. A single tear leaked out. It wasn't a tear of repentance. It was a tear of defeat. I need a pen, he said. I slid a pen across the table. It was a cheap plastic pen from the supply closet, not his gold fountain pen. Josephine, he said, looking at the pen. You are cold. No, Dad, I said. I am clear. He signed the paper Malcolm had faxed over earlier, the voluntary resignation of trustee powers. You grounded me to teach me to be a good girl, I said, watching the ink dry. You wanted me to be compliant. You wanted me to be like Mom. I picked up the paper. But Grandfather didn't write the trust to teach me to be good, I said. He wrote it to teach me to be awake. I looked at the screen. Thank you, Malcolm. We will handle the transition. Be careful, Josephine, Malcolm said. The king is dead. Long live the queen. But remember, power has a taste. Do not learn to like it too much. The screen went black. I was alone with my father. But he wasn't really there anymore. He was just a man in a suit, staring at a future where he didn't matter. Go home, Dad, I said. The driver is waiting. I authorized him. He stood up slowly. He walked to the door. He didn't look back. I watched him go. I felt a wave of sadness, deep and heavy, wash over me. I had saved the fortune. I had saved the company. But I had lost the last illusion of having a father. I looked down at the resignation letter. It was just a piece of paper, but it weighed a ton. The board of directors meeting on Friday morning felt less like a corporate gathering and more like a tribunal. The mahogany table, usually polished to a mirror shine, seemed to absorb the cold, fluorescent light of the room. There were 12 seats. 11 were occupied. I sat at the far end, opposite the empty chair reserved for the chairman. To my right sat Naomi Klein. To my left sat the external counsel for the board. The doors opened at 9 o'clock sharp. Everett Callahan walked in. He walked slowly. The bounce in his step, that aggressive forward momentum that had defined him for 40 years, was gone. He looked like a man who had aged a decade in a single night. Behind him walked Bryce, though walked is a generous term. Bryce shuffled, his eyes glued to the carpet, looking like a man marching to the gallows. They took their seats, Everett at the head, Bryce to his right. Arthur Pym, the head of the audit committee, cleared his throat. This special session is called to order. The agenda is single point, the governance review of the Callahan Meridian Group. This is a witch hunt, Everett said. His voice was raspy, lacking its usual boom. I built this table. I built this building. And you nearly burned it down, Pym said, his voice devoid of sympathy. Ms. Gray, please present the timeline. I stood up. I didn't have a laser pointer. I didn't have a flashy slide deck. I had a single sheet of paper. The timeline is simple, I began, my voice steady. On Tuesday morning, the CEO attempted to coerce a beneficiary me into signing a waiver to collateralize the trust assets for the Stonegate acquisition. When I refused based on risk data, the CEO retaliated by stripping my security clearance, confiscating my communication devices, and confining me to the penthouse. I looked around the table. The directors were listening intently. This was not discipline, I continued. It was an attempt to bypass the special oversight activation clause triggered by my 28th birthday. Following this, I invoked the freeze provision to protect the assets. This freeze forced a pause in the transaction flow. I turned to look at Bryce. He flinched. During this pause, I said, the compliance team uncovered a payment of $2 million to a shell company, Apex Solutions. This entity is controlled by the executive vice president, Bryce Callahan. The payment was a kickback disguised as a consulting fee. That is a lie, Bryce shouted, though his voice cracked. It was a finder's fee. It is standard practice. It is standard practice for a broker, Naomi Klein interjected smoothly. It is fraud for an officer of the company. Did you disclose this fee to the board? Bryce opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence is your answer, Naomi said. Arthur Pym looked at the general counsel. Is the motion prepared? It is, the lawyer said. I move to immediately suspend Bryce Callahan from all executive duties, pending a criminal referral to the SEC. Pym said, all in favor. 10 hands went up. Dad, Bryce whispered, looking at Everett. Do something. Everett looked at his son. For the first time, I saw the heartbreak in his eyes. He realized that the son he had tried to mold into a king was just a court jester who stole the silverware. Go, Everett whispered. Just go, Bryce. Security entered the room. They didn't drag him out, but they stood close enough that Bryce got the message. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, a jagged, ugly sound. He walked out of the room, and with him went the future my father had spent 30 years imagining. Now, it was just the king. Now for the CEO, Pym said. We have the report from the trust protector. It details a pattern of self-dealing, including the undisclosed margin loans and the historical settlement regarding the patent rights. Everett straightened his tie. He tried to summon the old fire. I am the primary trustee, Everett announced. I control 51% of the voting shares through the trust. You cannot remove me. I can fire this entire board right now. He reached for the gavel in front of him. It was a reflex. He thought holding the wooden hammer gave him the power. Actually, Everett, I said softly. You can't. I am the trustee, he roared, slamming his hand on the table. Not anymore, I said. As of 8 o'clock this morning, Malcolm Red accepted your resignation letter, the one you signed last night. I signed that under duress, Everett shouted. I withdraw it. It has already been filed with the state of Delaware, Naomi said. You are no longer the trustee, which means the voting rights have reverted. Reverted to whom? Everett sneered, turning his venom on me. To you. You think these people will let a 28-year-old girl run a Fortune 500 company? They will eat you alive. Josephine. I know, I said. That is why I am not keeping the vote. This was the checkmate. This was the moment I had planned since I first opened the safe in my closet. I pulled a second document from my folder. Article 9, Section 5. I cited, in the event of a trustee's removal for cause, the co-trustee me has the power to designate a temporary governance committee to hold the voting rights until a new permanent structure is established. I slid the paper down the table to Arthur Pym. I am not taking the crown. Dad, I said. I am giving it to the system. I have appointed a committee of 3 Naomi Klein, Arthur Pym, and the former dean of the Wharton School of Business. They hold the 51% vote now. Everett stared at me. He was stunned. He couldn't process it. In his world, power was something you grabbed and hoarded. The idea that someone would seize power only to distribute it was alien to him. You gave it away, he whispered. I insulated it, I corrected. I made sure no one person, not even me, could do what you did. Pym looked at the list. He nodded, impressed. This is highly irregular, Ms. Gray, but it is solid. It restores fiduciary integrity immediately. Then let us vote, Pym said. The motion is to remove Everett Callahan as CEO, effective immediately, and to appoint an interim leadership team to restructure the debt and terminate the Stonegate acquisition. All in favor. Every hand at the table went up. Even the directors who had been terrified of Everett yesterday raised their hands high. They sensed the wind changing. The motion carries, Pym said. Everett, we will need your badge. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of an era ending. Everett reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the silver badge he had worn since 1985. He placed it on the table. It made a small metallic clink. Meeting adjourned, Pym said. The directors filed out quickly. They didn't want to make eye contact with the fallen giant. Finally, it was just the two of us again. Father and daughter, the creator and the destroyer. Everett sat slumped in his chair. He looked at the empty room. You destroyed it, he said. The dynasty. It's gone. The dynasty was a lie. Dad, I said, walking over to him. It was built on debt and secrets. I didn't destroy the company. I saved it. The stock is already up 4% this morning on the news of the restructuring. You killed Stonegate, he said. Stonegate was a cancer, I said. We are going back to basics, logistics, supply chain, the things we are actually good at, the things Grandfather Silas built before the ego took over. He looked up at me. His eyes were searching my face, looking for the little girl who used to ask for bedtime stories. What do you want? Josephine, he asked. His voice was hollow. You gave away the vote. You aren't CEO. You aren't trustee. What was all this for? Why did you humiliate me? I didn't want to humiliate you, I said. I just wanted you to stop. I placed my hand on the back of his chair. I want the company to live, I said. I want the 5,000 people who work here to have jobs next year. And for me, I want to come to work and do my job without wondering if my father is going to burn the building down to get his face on a magazine cover. I paused, my voice trembling slightly with the emotion I had held back for days. And I want the family to stop using me as decoration, I said. I am not a piece of furniture you can move around. I am not a signature you can demand. I am a person. Everett looked at his hands. I did it for you. All of it. No, Dad, I said gently. You did it for the mirror. He let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked at the badge on the table. "I didn't think you dared," he whispered. "I thought you were soft. I thought I had grounded you." "You did ground me," I said. "You grounded me in reality." "I didn't think you had it in you," he repeated. "I didn't either," I admitted. I was terrified, but then I realized something. I wasn't afraid of losing the money. I was afraid of becoming you. I just couldn't pretend anymore, I said. I stepped back. "The car is downstairs. Mom is waiting for you at the house. Go home. Dad, rest. You have been running for 40 years. It is time to stop." He stood up. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He didn't say goodbye. He just turned and walked out to the side door, the one reserved for executives. I stood there for a moment in the silence of the boardroom. I looked at the view of Harbor Point one last time. The city looked different today. It didn't look like a kingdom to be conquered. It looked like a place to live. I picked up my folder. I walked out of the boardroom. I walked down the long corridor, past the portraits of the past CEOs. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. When the doors opened, the security guard, Mike, was standing there. He straightened up. "Ms. Gray," he said, "do you need the driver? I can bring the car around to the private exit." I looked at the revolving doors at the main entrance. Sunlight was streaming in, bright and unfiltered. "No, Mike," I said, "I don't need the private exit." "Are you sure?" he asked. "The press is still out there." "Let them look," I said. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. I wasn't the director of risk anymore. I wasn't the co-trustee. I was just Josephine. And for the first time in 28 years, I didn't owe anyone a signature. "I am walking," I said. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The air was cold and fresh. The noise of the city rushed over me, honking horns, chatter, the hum of life. It was chaotic. It was messy. And it was mine. I took a deep breath, turned right, and started walking down the avenue, one step after another, owning every single inch of my own life. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on Josephine's decision. If you enjoyed this drama, please subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Your support means the world to us.